Geralt of Rivia, monster slayer witcher, and, surprisingly, a philosopher. Beyond the grunts and swordplay, Geralt constantly faces choices that would challenge anyone's moral compass. What truly defines good? In a world teeming with evil, and how does a man stripped of most emotions navigate a path of ethical complexity? Let's be real. The Witcher isn't just about hacking apart drowners or flirting with sorceresses. At its core, it's a series about choices, often impossible choices, and about living with the consequences. And that's where Geralt becomes more than just a grizzled mercenary with two swords. He turns into a reluctant philosopher, someone who's constantly being pushed to consider morality, justice, and even the nature of humanity itself. Think about it. Geralt has been trained since childhood to suppress most emotions. Witcher mutations make him calm under pressure, resistant to fear, and supposedly detached from feelings. Yet, paradoxically, this emotionless man is often the one most burdened by the weight of moral dilemmas. He might say things like, "Evil is evil, lesser, greater, middling makes no difference." That's straight out of Andrzej Sapkowski's books, and it sounds almost like something Aristotle or Kant could have said if they'd been out on the path slaying griffins. And let's unpack that statement for a second. Evil is evil. Geralt rejects the idea of choosing a lesser evil, even though in practice, he often ends up doing exactly that. Philosophers call this a moral absolutist stance. Kant, for example, would argue that lying is always wrong, no matter the situation. Geralt seems to believe the same about evil in general. But here's the twist. In the world he inhabits, there's rarely such a thing as a good choice. Almost every path leads to suffering, betrayal, or regret. Take the infamous Striga story from The Last Wish. Geralt is hired to lift the curse from King Foltest's daughter. He could have killed the monster outright, after all. It's been terrorizing the land. But instead, he takes the harder road. He locks himself in a crypt with a raging beast, knowing he might die, because he believes there's a possibility of saving an innocent girl. That's not just monster hunting. That's wrestling with the question, what makes a monster? Is it the creature itself, or the curse that shapes it? Philosophically, this touches on something like existentialism. Think Sartre, who argued that existence precedes essence. In other words, it's not what we're born as, but what we choose to become that defines us. The Striga wasn't born. A monster circumstance made her that way. Geralt's decision reflects a belief in the possibility of change, of redemption, and that's a very humanistic stance for someone who claims not to feel much. Another example, in The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, Geralt constantly faces branching decisions that ripple outward in massive ways. Do you support the Bloody Baron's attempts to reconcile with his family, knowing he's an abusive drunk? Do you interfere in Skellige politics, backing Cerys or Hjalmar? Or do you just walk away and let people destroy themselves? Each of these decisions forces the player, and by extension Geralt, to confront questions of responsibility. Do we have an obligation to intervene when others are suffering? Or is it more ethical to let people determine their own fates, even if it leads to tragedy? This is where Geralt aligns with philosophers like John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. Sometimes, Geralt's choices are guided by outcomes, who will suffer less, who will benefit more. Other times, he flips back into deontology, doing what seems morally right, regardless of the fallout. That constant tension makes him feel so real because, let's be honest, we do the same thing in our daily lives. We justify some actions by the results, while condemning others by principle. And then there's the question of neutrality. Geralt loves to say, "I'm just a witcher, I don't take sides." Sounds pragmatic, right? But neutrality is itself a choice, and often a very destructive one. There's a powerful quote from Desmond Tutu. "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." In other words, Geralt's supposed neutrality often collapses under the weight of reality. When Nilfgaard invades the north, when Scoia'tael rebels rise up, when Ciri's very future hangs in the balance, Geralt cannot remain neutral. He gets dragged into history. Philosophy be damned. That raises another question. Is Geralt a hypocrite or just human? He tries to live by one rule. Stay out of politics, just kill monsters. But the world doesn't let him. Which is pretty much the human condition, isn't it? We make rules for ourselves, we draw boundaries, and then life forces us to break them. Geralt is relatable because his philosophy isn't neat or consistent. It's messy, improvisational, and contradictory, and that's what makes it feel authentic. Interestingly, Geralt also embodies a kind of stoicism. He endures pain, loss, and betrayal without collapsing. The Stoics, think Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, believe that we can't control external events, only our reactions to them. Geralt seems to live by this. Rail. He knows he can't prevent every war, can't stop every atrocity, but he can control how he responds, whether he preserves a shred of dignity and honor in a brutal world. His dry humor, his grunts, his resigned sighs, they're all tiny stoic meditations in disguise. But let's not forget, Geralt's philosophy isn't born in a vacuum. It's shaped by his relationships. Yennefer, Triss, Dandelion, and especially Ciri. Through them, we see cracks in his armor. We see that beneath the mutations and the supposed lack of emotion, Geralt cares deeply. In fact, maybe too deeply. His philosophy isn't about detachment, it's about survival. It's about finding a way to keep moving forward in a world that constantly demands impossible choices. And that might be the ultimate takeaway. Geralt shows us that philosophy isn't just something written in dusty books or debated in ivory towers. It's lived every day in the decisions we make. He's a reminder that sometimes the right choice isn't clear, and that's okay. What matters is trying, with whatever wisdom and courage we can muster, to carve out a path through the darkness. So, is Geralt a philosopher? I'd say yes. Not because he sits around writing treatises, but because he embodies the core of philosophy itself, the struggle to figure out how to live, how to choose, and how to stay human in an often inhuman world. And maybe, just maybe, that's why he resonates so strongly with us. After all, we're all witchers in our own way, monsters to fight, paths to choose, regrets to carry. The only real question is, how do we live with those choices? When we talk about Geralt of Rivia, one phrase keeps coming up over and over again: the lesser evil. It's almost become synonymous with the White Wolf himself. But here's the question: is choosing the lesser evil actually the right choice, or is it simply the most pragmatic way out when every road ahead is drenched in blood? Take the legendary Stregobor versus Renfri dilemma, one of the most defining moments of Geralt's philosophy. Stregobor insists that Renfri is a mutant, cursed by the so-called Curse of the Black Sun, and that she is destined to bring chaos and death. His argument is utilitarian to the extreme: kill one woman to prevent 1,000 deaths. Renfri, on the other hand, claims she is no monster but a survivor, hunted, wronged, and bent on vengeance against those who ruined her life. Both sides demand Geralt's intervention, and both cloak themselves in a moral logic that appeals to justice. So, what does Geralt do? He refuses to take a side at first, but as events unfold, he is dragged into conflict. Renfri threatens innocent townsfolk. Stregobor hides behind his tower and schemes. In the end, Geralt kills Renfri and her band of outlaws in the streets of Blaviken, a massacre that scars his reputation forever. He becomes the Butcher of Blaviken, remembered not for saving lives, but for bathing in blood. Now, was that truly the lesser evil? On the surface, Geralt prevented Renfri from murdering innocents. He stopped a bloodbath. But the irony is painful. To stop a bloodbath, he created one. To uphold neutrality, he was forced into violence. It's the eternal paradox of utilitarian ethics, the same one debated by philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Do the ends justify the means? Can one atrocity be justified if it prevents a greater one? But Geralt is no abstract philosopher. He's a man with scars and emotions he's been taught to bury. His choices leave deep marks, not just on the world, but on himself. Every time he chooses the lesser evil, he chips away at his soul. The Yennefer incident follows him forever, shaping his reputation as a dangerous killer rather than a savior. Even when his intent is noble, perception turns him into a villain. This is where Geralt's philosophy gets interesting. The lesser evil is not just about moral calculus, it's about identity. Geralt constantly wrestles with the idea of what it means to be a witcher. Is he a monster slayer, bound to neutrality? Or is he a human being with the right to choose compassion over calculation? The Yennefer choice forces us to question whether neutrality is even possible in a morally gray world. By refusing to pick sides, Geralt ended up shaping the story anyway. His non-choice became a choice, and the lesson? Sometimes the lesser evil doesn't feel lesser at all. It just feels inevitable. In the long term, Geralt's reliance on this philosophy hardens him. His reputation as the butcher spreads, and people project fear and suspicion onto him. The tragedy is that his attempts to minimize suffering often isolate him further. He's caught in a cycle where even his most pragmatic decisions corrode his humanity bit by bit. And that's why the lesser evil isn't just a catchy phrase, it's the tragic backbone of Geralt's existence. It's a reminder that in the Witcher's world, every path is paved with blood. The real question is, how much of that blood will stay in your hands, and how much of yourself are you willing to lose in the process? One of the most striking elements of The Witcher is that the scariest monsters are rarely the ones with claws, scales, or glowing eyes. Geralt spends his life slaying drowners, wyverns, and strigas, yet the moments that haunt him most often involve human beings. Time and again, it's not the supernatural beasts, but ordinary men and women who prove capable of the greatest cruelties. And in these moments, Geralt's philosophy of neutrality is tested to its breaking point. Take, for instance, the plight of non-humans in the northern kingdoms. Elves, dwarves, and dryads are treated as second-class citizens, if not outright enemies. They are pushed into ghettos, forced to wear identifying markers, denied jobs, and hunted like animals. In cities like Novigrad, mobs burn them alive under the banner of religion or order. This mirrors grim chapters of our own history. The Spanish Inquisition, the pogroms against Jews in Eastern Europe, or the treatment of indigenous peoples under colonialism. Andrzej Sapkowski isn't subtle here. His fantasy world is a distorted mirror held up to our reality. Geralt, as a witcher, occupies a strange space in this social hierarchy. He himself is a mutated outsider, distrusted by humans and non-humans alike. In one scene, he reflects bitterly that the monsters he slays often kill for survival, while humans kill for sport, greed, or hatred. Philosopher Thomas Hobbes once wrote that life in a state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short. But the Witcher's world suggests that organized society can be just as cruel, if not worse, when fueled by prejudice and fear. The Scoia'tael, the guerrilla bands of elves and dwarves, embody this tension. On one hand, they are freedom fighters resisting oppression. On the other, they commit atrocities against civilians, deepening the cycle of hate. Geralt often encounters their ambushes, forced to decide whether to intervene, ignore, or fight. His neutrality is constantly challenged. Does staying out of it mean he's allowing systemic oppression to continue? Or is taking a side just plunging deeper into endless cycles of bloodshed? This dilemma recalls the writings of Martin Luther King Jr., who criticized the white moderate more than the outright racist. In his letter from Birmingham jail, King argued that the greatest obstacle to justice wasn't the Ku Klux Klan, but those who preferred order over justice, those who stood aside and claimed neutrality. Geralt, in his insistence on not choosing sides, sometimes risks falling into that very trap. by refusing to actively challenge human cruelty. Does he become complicit in it? Consider the massacre at Rivia, where mobs turned on non-humans in a frenzy of violence. Geralt's attempt to defend the victims cost him his life, or nearly did, depending on which version of the story you follow. Here, neutrality became impossible. When confronted with naked brutality, Geralt instinctively chose compassion, even if it meant breaking his so-called Witcher code. The irony is that this moment, often portrayed as his downfall, is also one of his most profoundly human acts. It shows that Geralt cannot truly sever himself from empathy, no matter how much he tries to cloak himself in detachment. So does Geralt's neutrality serve justice or enable oppression? The answer may depend on how we define justice itself. If justice is balance maintaining order, preventing escalation, then perhaps neutrality works. But if justice means standing up for the marginalized and the voiceless, then neutrality is a failure. Geralt's choices constantly swing between these two poles, leaving readers and players to wrestle with the ambiguity. And maybe that's the point. Geralt embodies the tragic truth that in a world steeped in injustice, every choice leaves a stain. Neutrality can protect him from immediate entanglements, but it also isolates him, making him an observer rather than an agent of change. In contrast, breaking neutrality exposes him to danger and judgment, but it also affirms his humanity. As the philosopher Hannah Arendt warned in her reflections on the Holocaust, the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. In the end, Geralt's journey forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes, the monsters we fear most walk on two legs and wear familiar faces. The drowners and strigas may be slain with silver swords, but the deeper evils, hatred, prejudice, and indifference cannot be vanquished so easily. And it is in these struggles, not in the battles against beasts, that the true weight of Geralt's philosophy is revealed. On the surface, Witcher contracts are supposed to be straightforward. A monster terrorizes a village, someone posts a notice on the board, Geralt shows up, negotiates a price, and then steel or silver does the rest. But if you've spent any amount of time in Geralt's boots, whether through the novels or CD Projekt Red's Witcher 3, you know it's never that simple. The world of the continent thrives in shades of gray, and Geralt, by profession, is constantly caught in them. Take, for example, quests where the monster is not what it seems. Geralt might be asked to kill a werewolf, only to discover that the creature retains a painful amount of its humanity. Or he might find that a noonwraith haunting a field is the restless spirit of a murdered woman, more victim than villain. Suddenly, the contract isn't just about swinging a silver sword, it's about moral calculus. Do you fulfill your duty as a witcher, or do you question the very terms of that duty? A particularly telling case can be seen in quests like Shani's Rescue, or similar storylines where Geralt's personal relationships intersect with his professional duties. Shani, a medic and someone Geralt deeply respects, finds herself in situations where the real monsters are people. Soldiers who exploit the chaos of war, mercenaries who treat lives as bargaining chips. Here, Geralt's Witcher neutrality is tested. Does he stick to the letter of his contract, or does he prioritize the well-being of someone he cares about? It's in these crossroads that we see his humanity wrestle with his Witcher training. This tension isn't unique to Geralt. In literature, it echoes themes from thinkers like Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill. Kant's deontological ethics would say, follow your duty, regardless of outcome. In Geralt's case, that would mean fulfilling the contract. Kill the monster, take the coin, walk away. But Mill's utilitarianism asks a different question. What choice brings about the greater good for the greater number? And that's often where Geralt lands. His decisions, messy as they are, usually come down to weighing outcomes rather than rigid duty. But the price of such pragmatism is heavy. In The Last Wish, Stories and beyond, Geralt's reputation becomes shaped by these moments. Villagers whisper that witchers meddle too much, or worse, that Geralt is unpredictable. Sometimes sparing monsters, sometimes killing humans. To the common folk, neutrality was supposed to mean consistency, but to Geralt, neutrality is never about detachment. It's about buying himself the freedom to choose in a world that constantly demands compromise. This moral ambiguity also reveals how much Geralt has evolved as a character. Early on, his approach to contracts is clinical. The fewer questions asked, the better. But as his relationships with Yennefer, Ciri, and even Shani deepen, we see him deviate from the rigid Witcher code. A contract that might once have been a clean, kill the beast, becomes something else entirely when innocence or friends are caught in the crossfire. What makes Geralt fascinating is not that he always chooses the right option, because in Sapkowski's world, the right option barely exists, but that he shoulders the consequences of his choices. The villagers may never know that the Leshen he spared was protecting an ancient grove, or that the werewolf he let live was more victim than predator. But Geralt knows, and that knowledge eats away at him in subtle, quiet ways. In the end, the gray area of contracts is what makes Geralt timeless. He forces us to ask, what do we do when our roles, our jobs, our duties clash with our humanity? Do we stick to the contract, or do we rewrite it in the moment, hoping that compassion outweighs consequence? For Geralt, the answer changes with every contract, every coin pouch, every glance at a friend in danger. And maybe that's the lesson. The world doesn't give us simple monsters, only complicated choices. For most Witchers, neutrality is a shield. The continent is forever torn by the push and pull of kingdoms, sorceresses, and unseen powers. A Witcher's survival depends on remaining above such conflicts. They kill monsters, not men. They take coin, not sides. At least, that's the creed. But for Geralt of Rivia, the moment love, loyalty, and lineage enter the equation, neutrality becomes a fragile illusion. Geralt is not just a Witcher. He is a man woven into a web of relationships that define him as much as his silver sword. Ciri, Yennefer, and Triss each represents a facet of his humanity, and each pulls him away from the comfort of detachment. When love and bloodlines are involved, Geralt is no longer the stoic contractor, but a father, a lover, a friend, and those roles demand choices that shatter the very idea of neutrality. Ciri, the daughter of destiny. If one figure destabilizes Geralt's Witcher code more than any other, it is Cirilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon. Ciri, the child of prophecy. From the moment of the law of surprise that bound their fates, Geralt's life ceased to be his own. His neutrality ended the day destiny placed a child in his care. Consider the novel's Time of Contempt and Baptism of Fire. As war rages between Nilfgaard and the Northern Kingdoms, neutrality becomes impossible because Ciri is at the very heart of the conflict. She is heir to Sintra, a pawn in Emhyr var Emrys's imperial ambitions and the embodiment of elder blood. Geralt, who once scoffed at destiny, is forced to confront it in the most personal way. The Witcher Code would suggest detachment protect the girl only insofar as the contract demands. But Geralt is no mere guardian. He is her father in every way but blood. Here, we see shades of Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics, where virtue lies not in abstract duty, but in the cultivation of character through relationships. Geralt's choices surrounding Ciri are not calculated by neutrality, but by philia, the love between parent and child. In The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, this dynamic reaches its emotional zenith. The player, as Geralt, is constantly asked to choose how to guide Ciri, encouraging independence, offering comfort, or demanding obedience. These choices are not about coin or contracts, but about what it means to raise a child. And the ultimate outcome. Whether Ciri survives, thrives, or disappears into the ether rests not on neutrality, but on love. Yennefer, the bond of soul and fire. If Ciri is Geralt's anchor to family, Yennefer is his eternal paradox. Their relationship, first bound by a djinn's wish, has always been a storm of passion, pride, and impossible longing. Neutrality shatters the moment Yennefer is involved, because for Geralt, she is not just a lover. She is a mirror of his own struggle for humanity. In The Last Wish, Geralt risks everything to free Yennefer from the djinn, an act that blurs the line between choice and fate. The very act of binding himself to her, willingly or not, sets him on a path where her survival, her ambitions, and her well-being outweigh any witcher's code. Later, in Baptism of Fire, Geralt's quest to rescue Ciri is inseparable from Yennefer's own desperate search. Their parallel journeys reveal a truth. Neutrality cannot coexist with love, for love demands allegiance. Here, one can invoke Kierkegaard's idea of the leap of faith. Time and again, he risks death, political entanglement, and the disdain of kings and sorcerers alike to stand beside her. And in doing so, he undermines his supposed detachment, showing that his code bends easily under the weight of love. The games highlight this beautifully. Players are forced to choose between Yennefer and Triss, a decision that is less about coin and more about Geralt's heart. Neutrality evaporates the moment the choice is made, for it defines not only Geralt's romantic fate, but also his sense of loyalty and identity. Triss, compassion in contrast. Where Yennefer represents fire and chaos, Triss Marigold embodies gentleness and stability. For many, she is the safer choice, a reminder that love need not be so destructive. Yet even Triss complicates Geralt's neutrality. During the events of The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings, Triss becomes entangled in political upheaval, forcing Geralt to pick sides in ways that run counter to his Witcher detachment. Triss also reveals another dimension of Geralt's struggle, compassion. In philosophy, one might look to David Hume's emphasis on sentiment as the root of morality. Hume argues that reason alone cannot dictate ethics. Rather, it is human feeling that moves us. Geralt's actions toward Triss, protecting her, sometimes choosing her over Yennefer, reflect that same reliance on emotion over reason. Neutrality demands cold logic, but Geralt is too human for that. The impossible choices. What binds Ciri, Yennefer, and Triss together is not just their importance in Geralt's life, but the way they force impossible choices upon him. In Sapkowski's novels, Geralt repeatedly faces the lesser evil, where neutrality would dictate inaction, but love and loyalty compel intervention. He must decide whether to rescue Ciri at the risk of war, whether to follow Yennefer into peril, or whether to support Triss despite political fallout. These dilemmas echo the tragic choices of classical literature. Like Odysseus torn between Ithaca and his wanderings, or Hamlet caught between duty and conscience, Geralt cannot escape the weight of decision. His neutrality is tested not by monsters, but by the people he loves. And unlike contracts, where the consequences are contained, the ripple effects of these personal choices reshape the continent itself. The emotional toll. What is perhaps most striking is the emotional cost of these decisions. Geralt is not a man who wears his heart on his sleeve, yet the novels and games alike show the toll his relationships exact on him. His weariness is not merely physical, but existential. Every choice between neutrality and love chips away at his identity as a witcher. In Lady of the Lake, the culmination of Sapkowski's saga, Geralt dies not on a contract, but in defense of innocence, cut down in a senseless mob attack. It is a bitter irony. The man who tried so hard to remain neutral meets his end, not because of monsters, but because of his loyalty to those he loves. And yet, his reunion with Yennefer in Avalon suggests a kind of redemption, a recognition that love, for all its contradictions, is what made him human. The games continue this legacy, showing Geralt as a man who laughs with friends, mourns with family, and dreams of a quiet life. The toll is heavy, but it is also what elevates him from mercenary to myth. Conclusion. beyond neutrality. His life with Ciri, Yennefer, and Triss forces him to abandon the Witcher's creed in favor of something more profoundly human, the willingness to choose, even when every option is flawed. In this, Geralt echoes Albert Camus' notion of revolt, the idea that meaning is found not in avoiding choice, but in embracing it, however absurd the circumstances. Geralt's revolt is against the illusion of neutrality. His humanity shines brightest, not when he swings his sword, but when he risks his soul for those he cannot bear to lose. And perhaps that is why his story resonates so deeply, because in our own lives, like Geralt, we are often forced to choose between duty and love, between the easy neutrality of indifference and the costly path of connection. Geralt shows us that while neutrality might keep us safe, it is love, loyalty, and lineage that make us truly alive.